morning. My name's Jordan Marshall. I'm the Chief Reporter at Building. I'm really excited to be kicking off the fourth and final day of Digital Building Week with an interview with Dr. Kemp, Fellow and Technical Director at ATKINS and Chair of the UK BIM Alliance. First of all, I was just having a great chat to Anne off air, and I have just been told that today is the 1-year anniversary of her receiving her OBE for digital construction. So that's really exciting to have Anne here today. And moreover, she has 30 years of experience in the industry and has provided advice to some of the UK's biggest infrastructure clients, including Crossrail, HS2 and Heathrow. She's chair of the UK BIM Alliance and convener of the International Standards Organisation Committee for ISO 19650 and the committee developing the strategy for global standards for whole life infrastructure projects. Anne's resume can go on, and I can keep telling you about it, but it's probably more interesting for me to discuss it with her rather than me listing off her achievements. It's probably a better chat if you hear it from her. So first of all, thank you for joining us, Anne, and welcome. How are you going today?
I'm doing fine, thank you very much. Quite a nice sunny day today after all the rain yesterday.
I know. It's the weather's turned it on for us for our last day of Digital Building Week this week. So I guess my first question for you is if you could just tell me a bit about your journey to this point. How have you come to be in the position you're in? Can you tell me a bit about your career so far?
Yeah. Do you want the short or the long version? I'll give you the middle one.
Happy with both.
Well, so I'm a geographer by training. Started off in London and then moved over to Bristol to do my PhD, which was digital modelling of soil erosion, specifically gully growth. And that was quite useful actually doing the programming side of things. So my first job was at Barnes, which was an environmental consultancy just starting up. And I was doing air dispersion modelling, hydrological modelling and so forth. And then I was asked to set up their geographic information systems for them. So that's where really all the information management started off. And I really then moved into environmental assessment. So I guess the key projects, which still for me, I remember very fondly, was Europipe for Statoil and the Salisbury Plain training area for Ministry of Defence, where I was going up in a helicopter monitoring the exercises and going out in tanks and things. So that's pretty cool. All of that was interrupted actually with birth of my first child. I had a brief career break where actually I had to leave one company and was then invited by ATKINS to start doing consultancy for them again, setting up a geospatial business for them. And that's really what set me up for where I'm at now, in fact, all information is important. And so moving into managing information for multidisciplinary projects for the whole life of built environment became a key development within ATKINS, which obviously is now SNC Lavalin. And increasingly, I was then being pulled into helping with developing standards. So that's really where I got to when BIM started to appear in 2010, 2011, and got involved, and then essentially that's where the alliance started to grow, etc., etc.
So on that point, could you tell me a bit more about the BIM Alliance? What do you see its role as? How do you see it progressing? That sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I think first of all to say, well, what is BIM? And actually, probably the easiest way to explain it is to say it is better information management for the built environment. So we're looking at how to manage the built environment across the whole life cycle. So it's not just about planning or design or construction, it is around operation and in use. And we've got standards which are developed from the UK, what was BIM level 2. We've now got those international ISO 19650. And the UK BIM Alliance has been brought together with a range of BIM regions, BIM 4s, which were formed when the UK BIM task group had been set up by the UK government. And when that was disbanded, we were asked, well, would it be possible for actually industry to now take a lead? And so a group of us came together and said, yeah, this would be good, but let's do it as an alliance and try to make this a community covering the whole of the built environment. So it'd be very much inclusive, but developing a common understanding and a common voice about what needs to be done to develop better information management as a first fundamental step of digital transformation. And that's what we continue to be doing. So independent, trusted movement, helping the whole of industry to move forward on its journey for digital transformation.
And as part of that, the UK BIM framework is setting out standards and guidance, is that right? So how does that sort of play in?
Yeah, sure. So with the ISO 19650 taking over from the 1192 suite of documents from the UK, what we needed to do was to be able to give a clear signposting to that we were shifting to what we now call the UK BIM framework. So rather than BIM level 2 and a feeling that, oh, well, there must be something following it, so shall we have a race to BIM level 3, 4, and 5? It was like, no, we've now developed the ISO 19650 from all of the experience, all the testing that was done with the 1192 suite. It's landed. Now really embrace that. Let's work together across the clients and the whole of the supply chain and delivery team to get this to work. And actually to know, well, what are the outcomes? What's the value that we're after in doing this? So it's not just doing BIM or information management for the sake of it. It is to improve the built environment. So the UK BIM framework is actually supported jointly by the British Standards Institution, the Centre for Digital Built Britain, and the UK BIM Alliance. And there's a website where you can get all the standards, but also there's extensive guidance now for each of the parts of the ISO, but also the key themes. And that's been a massive collaboration, huge effort, a voluntary effort from the industry, for which are really, really grateful to everybody. And also a lot of feedback as well. So the website and on that is that we encourage people to feedback and say what problems they have so that we can respond to that. So it's sort of a organic and living, continuing efforts to really help anybody and everybody in our industry to move forward. So it's very inclusive. Anybody is invited to come and either help or be helped on this journey.
I suppose part of the recurring rhetoric there is that, you know, it's a journey and that we're moving forward. What are the biggest changes that you've seen happen so far in the past, you know, 5 years or 10 years or year? What have been the biggest changes for those working in the built environment?
Well, I think obviously in this last year, if we didn't have digital ways of working, this shift to many people working from home wouldn't have been possible. So we've seen a huge increase in uptake and striving towards improving how we manage information, because that's actually a massive part of our valuable assets around built environment. So it's not just about the physical structure, whether that be part of the building or the infrastructure itself. It's actually the information about it, which can help us in managing the asset, but also, you know, improving on it as well, whether it be an existing asset or whether it needs to be a new asset as well. So I think that's that's really been highlighted by the crisis that we continue to live in at the moment. But I think also one of the beauties about it is that what I'm seeing is that there's an increasing understanding that we are talking about whole life. And that gives us both some challenges in that that's involving a lot of people who talk about their particular part of the built environment in different ways with different language. So we've got to try and find a common language so that you know, if we are actually looking to reinstall new insulation, for instance, we know what the design specification for that should be, so that there aren't some of the mistakes that obviously we've seen with Grenville and so forth. So trying to get that common approach, which will actually allow for a golden thread, a common thread of information, which everybody can get access to appropriately, but in a secure way, is key. And what that unlocks, which I think is the exciting thing, is the different aspects. So we can be looking and using that information to help us with net zero, with sustainability. We can be looking at it from the point of view of in use. So actually for any of us now, with the massive change in how we're actually using offices, for instance, if we've got the right information to tell us, well, what could the potential use now be when we've got greater space that we need per person? How could we actually adapt to that use? How can we change? How can we actually implement useful booking of meetings and of social events at those offices? So it's that sort of flexibility, and then well, how do we get there? So what's the transport? What's the availability on the trains, etc., etc. So it's that opening up, being able to look at our infrastructure and make it more resilient and make it more environmentally sensitive. So I think is the opportunities which are really opening up to us now.
And as I understand, that's another piece of work that you're involved in is, you know, the creation of global standards for the whole life cycle of infrastructure projects. How's that progressing, and how significant is that in this discussion?
Yeah, it's really significant. So, so I mentioned before the 1192 suite of documents, which was for supporting particularly the government departments on BIM, and there was a mandate for 2016 that all publicly funded projects for central government would be using BIM. It was decided very early on by UK government that actually we should lift that to international standards to help with export capability of the UK industry. Early on in that process, I was asked to become convener of that particular committee. And we've now worked through parts 1 to 3, and also part 5, which might seem a bit illogical, but we jumped to parts. So we've got both the concepts and principles. We've got the whole life now with parts 2 and 3 of how to manage information, and we've got the security mindedness approach within that international step. We're currently working on the information exchange with part 4. So being able to have that available so that wherever we are in the world, actually we can be implementing those standards, and actually having the UK BIM framework, which allows us both to think about it from the context of the UK, but also there's a number of countries who are now following, for instance, our approach to classification and our overall approach to information exchange. So it's facilitating us to be able to both support international companies such as ATKINS. So for us now, having an international standard which we can roll out across the whole of the company is really valuable. And in fact, this week we're going through our kite mark, our second year of the kite mark for ISO 19650. And I think many international companies are finding that that's a real advantage. But also within the UK as well. I think that consistency, if we can really drive that consistency across the whole of the industry for all of the clients, and deep into the delivery teams and the supply chains. So that's helping the SMEs and the trades in this as well. It's not just about the clients and the tier ones at all. It's helping everybody.
Brilliant. Another one of the projects that you're working on is the National Digital Twin Program. If you could just tell me a bit about, you know, what exactly that is and how important that is and how it's progressing, that would be very interesting for everyone, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. And I think the thing is to understand the connection between the UK BIM framework and the National Digital Twin. So we're looking at the information management framework, which would support that National Digital Twin program. And what I love about it is it takes me back to my geography and my geospatial days, because we are talking about, you know, it's all data, it's all information. And pulling that together, we now, with the 19650 series in the UK BIM framework, we've got the ability to be able to specify what is the information that's required. Now, that can be for 3D models, but actually intelligent 3D models. So it's not just about the geometry, it's about the data that's actually attached to that geometry. And that's what's really key and has been in the past underestimated. What would be really great is to have, for instance, O&I manuals, which are actually, the data is actually attached to each of the features, each of the elements of the model of the asset, of the built asset. So you know what it is, what it should be doing, what its design specification is, if it needs to be repaired, what it should be repaired with, what's needed to repair it, etc., etc. And with the National Digital Twin, you're building all of those elements together, but they each can be managed independently. So it's not that it's one amorphous mass. Actually, they can each be, you can break it down sensibly, pragmatically, securely, so that you're getting the right information to the right person at the right time to inform a specific decision. The digital twin, where it's different from what you would perhaps think of being delivered through BIM in the past, is that that information was essentially what it is there and then in that moment. With the digital twin, what you're doing is you're saying actually it needs to be connected to how it exists in the real world. So the implication of that is that there's some way that you're sensing how it's behaving, how it's performing, how it's being impacted by the environment around it or by its in use. So you've got that, and it might not be that it's all in real time, but you've got a connection to it, and what's the performance of it? Is it performance of it through time? And you can control, whether that is real time, daily, weekly, monthly, 6 monthly. Depends on how often you would need that information. So it's that almost subtlety which starts to define what a digital twin is. And then, as I say, the national digital twin is how you can bring all of those together. So if it's Environment Agency, for instance, working with Network Rail or Highways England to anticipate what they need to do from a point of view of flood prevention, or indeed if there is actually flooding, how to respond to that flooding, they're able to share appropriately the data from their own models of their asset with the other organisation to help with that decision process.
Something that I pick up on there is something that construction firms have, the construction industry has often not been great at, which is the sharing of data. How do you ensure that's done in a secure way that businesses are different businesses and parties are comfortable with?
Well, and I think that's one of the successes of the National Digital Twin Programme, absolutely, is building a network of organisations who start talking to each other, start understanding each other's perspectives, how they define their own assets, and what they are willing to share, or what they need to share, or what is actually safe to share. And a lot of this, I think, that perhaps has been underestimated in the past has been the people side and the relationship side, but also then the legal and the procurement aspects of this as well. So there's a lot of work going on in that to be able to facilitate multi-party procurement and collaboration, rather than the old way, if you like, of doing this, where it's a real strict contractual line and no collaboration possible. That contractual line is still important, obviously. When things go wrong, we need to be able to rationally look at what's happened, who's responsible. So responsibility is still such a key part of this. But being able to do it from the point of view of that it facilitates secure, common sense sharing of data, I think is key. And it's how we can bring in intelligent common sense to the industry. I think is probably one of the great challenges of the day.
Yeah, well, definitely. And something else that you touched on earlier was the net zero agenda, and how BIM can play into that.
Yeah.
How, obviously, with the UK pushing towards hitting those net zero targets, how significant is it that, you know, the built environment sector gets on board with these technologies to help in that effort?
Well, if you don't have the data, you can't measure it, and you can't monitor it. So I think that has been one of the blocks to it. I also think that we could overcomplicate it as well. So it doesn't need to be that complicated to be able to move forward and make progress towards net zero. And I think one of the other things is to make it attainable. So saying net zero, yeah, it's fantastic to have that high bar, but it also is oversimplifying and making it very black and white. So if we remember where net zero has come from and the wider sustainability, I think that's really key. So being able to to step back from just net zero and think, what do we need to accomplish for this particular project? Is it just net zero, or should we be looking at other environmental aspects to that? So forgive me, I'm going back to my old environmental assessment days. What is the data that's required? How can we actually achieve that net zero? So don't get me wrong, I do think that net zero is a really useful strategy to be targeting. But you need the data for it. You need it from the supply side. You need to do it from the design perspective as well. All of that is facilitated by having better information management and obviously having it in a digital form. So being able to work through clients, through the supply and the trades, and to the manufacturers is vital. And a lot of that is then that common language of being able to actually track, well, for this particular material, actually what carbon does it imply? How do you need to manage it? Then you can do your sums to say, well, yeah, that's not going to hit our net zero. What else can we do? What are the alternatives? So setting up those different scenarios is exactly what you can do with BIM, or if you like the digital twin, you can be doing optioneering and saying, well, what's our best guesstimate? What's our best target that we can achieve here?
That, I mean, I completely agree that, it's wider than just targeting, net zero specifically. Circling back to something else you touched on about how important it's been this past year for us to have the ability to work digitally and remotely and have all these things. One of the other parts of the COVID-19 recovery plans, obviously the government's build lots of infrastructure plan, essentially, with unprecedented amounts of investment in infrastructure coming. And obviously big infrastructure in the UK has had some hits recently, in projects haven't exactly been making the headlines for great reasons necessarily. How significant is it? How important is it that this data is available, for people to learn from, and for future projects moving forward? I guess. Sorry, that was fairly unclear.
So I guess just coming at it from the point of view of planning and planning approval and being able to,
I guess for HS2, how important is it that there's data available from Crossrail to learn from just to pick two examples, and is that something that this sort of thing facilitates?
Yeah, absolutely. So Crossrail was a fantastic flagship project for when all of this BIM principles and concepts were emerging. And yeah, certainly during the design and construction, there were some great demonstrations of how BIM was really helping. Obviously a really complex project with lots of different contractors, and it's fantastic with hindsight, isn't it? But if you'd been able to have a common approach to managing information and sharing information across those contractors, perhaps some of the difficulties and the delays could have been avoided. And I think it's the lessons learned which it is so important, actually, and we can do it with the principles and the concepts that we've got now, but do we actually do it? So I think that's a difficulty with any of these frameworks and BIM and so forth, is that the framework is there now, as it is with 55,000, with asset management, with 9001, with quality assurance. They're there to be used and to help us improve our projects, how we deliver them to time and quality, etc. But are we actually doing it, and are we putting them all together in a pragmatic way? And I think that's the challenge. That's what we can learn from Crossrail. That is what High Speed 2 is doing as well. So High Speed 2, for instance, is using the UK BIM framework from the information management team and looking at how to define assets and so forth. But I'm sure you should get High Speed 2 in to speak to that. So the opportunities are there, and the lessons from Crossrail and other projects are also there for the taking. How you would, with any project, particularly a national project, be able to deal with the different views and needs across a nation and regions. That's really difficult. What you can do, and I can say from my background with the environmental assessment and the geospatial perspective, is you can do your best in providing data which it can't be manipulated, can be or should be being interpreted in a balanced way and not manipulated or distorted, such that decisions can be made in the best way. The difficulty is that you could get pulled into political arguments, and that then takes you into a different world. And all we can do from the point of view of managing information is to ensure that we're providing information which is accurate and can, as far as possible, be presented in a way that can't be misinterpreted or manipulated. That's a skill in itself, and probably we could talk about that for hours, because that is quite a challenge.
Well, I mean, is there any advice you can give on that point? How do you go about presenting data in a way that can't be manipulated or misinterpreted?
I think the answer to that is ensuring that you're getting the right people reporting. Well, in fact, I know that that's the answer. I think that we could go. If you're thinking about the misnews that we have on social media and so forth, it is trying to challenge, well, who is it who's presenting the data? What's the source of the data? How is it being presented? And that's tough, isn't it? Because you're actually then putting the responsibility on the receiver rather than the person who's actually putting it out. And that's where I think actually we need to be really challenging as a built environment sector, is to ensure that we've got people who are qualified to actually present that data and manage that data and analyze that data. And that brings us on to skills, that we need to ensure that we've got the right people in the industry who can actually analyze the data and present that data in a way which is scrupulous. So you've got the quality assurance, you've got technical assurance, you've also got that integrity, that that it's being presented in a scrupulous way, that it's not being distorted. And I do think that is actually one of our biggest challenges. And I think it comes down to skills and to qualifications. So I don't think we can get away from that.
Completely. I can't believe we're already nearly out of time here today. So I guess my last question for you is a bit forward-looking. With all these initiatives and things that you are working on, what are how do you hope to see the sector progress over the next 5 to 10 years?
I'd really love for information to be seen for the value that it can give. So I think if we can realise the ambitions, the concepts and principles that are behind the UK BIM framework, but actually are the foundation for whatever the National Digital Twin programme becomes, because in itself that's concepts and principles looking way out into 30 years. But whatever that becomes, I think it can embrace the principles which are actually in the Gemini principles and reflected actually right in, from the time that BIM was being formed by the UK government in 2010, 11, etc. That would be massive. So it is the whole life, but it's delivering value to society, to economy, to the environment. So it is dealing with how it provides a better life for all of us, how we can run our built environment in a way which helps resilience of the natural environment and allows that to recover and for us to tackle climate change, be able to tackle and achieve net zero, but the wider sustainability. But obviously for us to have a thriving economy at the same time. Which is inclusive. So yeah, we didn't really touch on the inclusivity side of things, did we? But I think that's a really important part for our society as well.
I mean, I'm more than happy to circle back to that point. How does all this play into inclusivity and improving that throughout society and the industry?
It should do, but it very easily could not. So when we're talking about the data side of things and technology, I think it is really important that it supports decisions which do actually include, a variety, a diversity of thinking. So that does include for slow thinking, for being able to come back and reflect. So it's mindfulness in action is something that I've referred to in the past, is that actually for each of us, we need time to reflect on the wider issues. It's not all about in the moment, which can be the problem with technology and with all the meetings we're having at the moment. We need that time to sit back and reflect and ensure that we are allowing that diversity of thinking to come to play. And we should be able to do that, but I think that in itself needs to be designed into the process, into the technology, into the way that we're presenting data. And so that's we need to involve psychologists and so forth into this as well, which I think is fascinating, actually.
No, I agree, and I'm really disappointed that we're already out of time today, because it's been a really engaging, wide-ranging conversation that's I've just really enjoyed. So thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Jordan. Really good to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll speak again soon, but yeah, it's been a really invaluable chat, and I'm sure that our audience has thought so too. I'd also like to thank the audience for joining us today. It's great that you've all been part of Digital Building Week. And I'd really like to encourage everyone to have a look at the rest of our Digital Building Week content as well. All the webinars that have already happened this week are available on demand, and our editor Chloe McCulloch is hosting our next session, which is a panel discussion on delivering transformation, which kicks off at 1 o'clock. So I'd really encourage everyone to check that out as well. So once again, a huge thank you to you, Anne. Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye to everyone.
Goodbye.